If you look at the problems, they have the same key points as the ones we solved before problem 211. There are parts where attenuation occurs, or depending on the propagation speed in tissue, attenuation happens as the wave passes through the tissue. The question is asking which function controls these aspects. The correct answer is to choose option B. This refers to expressions like depth gain compensation or time gain compensation. You can think of it as a point that adjusts the attenuation that occurs according to depth or as the wave passes through tissue. Next, let's move on and look at question number 212. This question can also be solved quite simply. It is asking where the intensity of the transmit pulse is adjusted. The term intensity here is important. The higher these values are, the greater the exposure the patient receives, so you should keep in mind that the exposure increases accordingly. The most relevant keyword here is output power, which is listed in option C. Let me emphasize once again that when the pulse is generated and its intensity is adjusted, and when these values increase, the factor that affects the patient is the output power. These are also referred to as bioeffects. When discussing biological effects, meaning whether something can affect the human body, this concept is often addressed together as a recurring pattern. Next, let's move on and look at question number 213. There's a keyword in the question that stands out right away. That is the term dynamic range. There was only one keyword related to this. It's the keyword related to compression, which is answer choice A. So, especially in the equipment section, there are certain words that are paired together in this way. If you just understand this content well, you'll see that you can solve the problems without much difficulty. Next, let's move on and look at question number 214. If you look at the question, it includes content asking about the frame averaging technique. Before solving the problem, let me briefly explain what this technique is. In the case of frame averaging, the first point is that you need to remember its synonymous expression. You can think of this expression as meaning to persist or to continue. It refers to a technique where, when a sound wave is transmitted, it persists for a longer period than a steady state. And let's assume we're drawing a picture in a simple way. When you draw a picture, if you carefully draw each element one by one, like drawing the house, then the tree and so on, you can end up with a higher quality picture. However, if you draw quickly and roughly, like in a crocus, the quality of the drawing drops to the point where it's hard to tell what it is. You can think of it in connection with that concept. Here, increasing frame averaging and persistence means that when creating a video, you are putting in the effort and crafting it carefully, step by step. As a result, you can say that the quality of the image increases, because it can effectively eliminate and clear away various tiny and distracting miscellaneous elements like noise around the image. Noise reduction is also certainly one of its most significant and powerful features available. On the other hand, if you look at the drawbacks, since it takes longer to create each frame, the temporal resolution and frame rate decrease accordingly. It takes a long time, and similarly, creating a single image also requires a significant amount of time. Please keep that in mind. I think you just need to pay attention to these two factors that you can gain through this technique. I can explain that the most notable feature of this technique is that while image quality improves and noise decreases, the frame rate and temporal resolution are reduced. Returning to the question and looking for the correct answer, let's focus on the most relevant parts. What you gain through this technique is a reduction in noise. So you should select option A as the correct answer. Although it's not a direct question, there is a good chance that questions testing your understanding of this concept could appear. Since it can also appear using synonymous terms like persistent, which you saw earlier, make sure to remember the same terminology. Now, let's move on and take a look at question number 215. If you look at the question, you'll see that a technique has been applied and the term harmonic is included. When you see something like this, the main advantage it is associated with is option A. Because it affects grayscale or contrast, just remember from the question that the harmonic technique is related to the part mentioned here. Next, let's move on and look at question number 216. If you look at the question, it says that a renal scan is being performed and the scan line density is decreased. The question is asking which technique can be applied to improve these kinds of issues. You just need to remember the key points mentioned here. There is a technique that fills in the empty spaces between the scan lines like this. The correct answer is choice A. In Korean, this technique is called interpolation. If you are ever asked to identify which specific imaging technique is required to effectively increase scan line density, or to fill in those empty spaces between lines, you should definitely select option A as your final answer. Next, let's move on and look at question 217. The question is a bit long, but you really only need to pay attention to the last sentence. It's asking about what kind of ultrasound system is not operator controlled. The frequency can be adjusted. Both power and intensity can be adjusted in the same way. Amplitude, as well as things like tech, can be compensated for. So the correct answer would be option 2. As for the speed of sound, it is determined by the medium, so it is a factor that cannot be arbitrarily adjusted by the operator. Next, let's move on and look at question 218. Looking at the question, it says that during the examination they encountered a structure with a very bright echo. This question is asking which control you would use to adjust this echo that is formed too brightly. There are several answer choices from A to B. The best answer you can choose here would be option B. If you manage to control the tech right here, you can easily adjust the brightness levels, ensuring that you can sufficiently and effectively control the very brightest areas of your scene. Next, let's move on and look at question 219. I can tell you that this question definitely requires memorization. You can think of it as the order in which the image is reproduced. So you just need to remember the process from the equipment to the display. The correct answer is option B. The ultrasound beam starts from the pulsar. The beam can be steered or its width can be changed by the beamformer. Next, the signal reflected from the subject is delivered to the receiver. Then, it is stored in memory and displayed on the video display. This is the sequence in which an ultrasound image is created. These are very basic concepts. Since this also tests your understanding of ultrasound equipment, make sure to remember it through this question. Let's move on and look at the next question. For this question, you just need to understand the content as a reference. Yes, this is a typical question asking about the frame rate used in B-mode imaging. Just make a note that the correct answer is about 10 to 50, which is option B. There aren't many questions that go into detail about this. Since sometimes only the general situation is asked, just check the standard values.